South Florida is our paradise.
But you know the issues.
Red tide.
Scratchy throat.
Make your eyes water.
Toxic algae.
Our river is basically on life support.
Nobody wants this algae. Nobody in the world wants it.
Lake Okeechobee discharges.
Just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, they're going to discharge more water.
In this community, we ponder the fact that the Herbert Hoover dike may not protect us at some point.
Our paradise is at risk.
And we're raising awareness on the issues threatening it. I'm Kelly Dunn.
And I'm Michael Williams.
Our local environment is in crisis.
We depend on it to live, to work, to play.
Tonight, a closer look at the problems, the causes, and what's being done to protect our paradise.
First, the issues right now. Earlier this month, concentrations of red tide, a naturally occurring toxic algae, were detected on beaches in Palm Beach County. Martin and St. Lucie counties as well. Within the last week, thousands of dead fish lined the coast in Any River County and beaches on North Hutchinson Island. Toxic red tide confirmed by Florida Fish and Wildlife.
This summer, Governor Scott declared a state of emergency in Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie, and Okeechobee counties over the blue-green algae disaster. The reoccurring toxic bloom partially caused by water discharges from Lake Okeechobee.
And since June, more than 80 billion gallons of Lake Okeechobee water has flowed into the St. Lucie River. This month, the Army Corps of Engineers announced discharges would stop during the dry season. And yesterday, President Trump signed the Water Resources and Development Act, which includes ultimately building a reservoir south of the lake to reduce discharges.
Red tide, toxic algae, lake discharges. You've told us for months now, this is all impacting how you live your lives in paradise. Before test results confirmed red tide, many of you felt the effects.
We started coughing the second we got out of the car.
Breathing problems, headaches, itchy eyes. Then beaches from the Treasure Coast south closed. The ripple effect impacted livelihoods that depend on clean water.
There's nobody out there.
It's how we make a living, is by, getting people out on the water.
2018, another lost summer when toxic blue-green algae reappeared in local waterways.
We don't know when this is going to end, but we're not going to stop fighting.
And once again, you demanded a change.
This doesn't get fixed, we're going to lose everything in Martin County.
Not taking any chances because you can't mask the dangers of toxic algae. Treasure Coast businesses locked up and people stayed home.
I don't think they really have a grasp on what small businesses go through and the struggle that we go through.
The toxic bloom caused in part by Lake O discharges needed when the levels are too high.
Concerned not for our homes, not for our cars. We're concerned for our life.
To protect those who live around the aging dike. But everyone is in agreement that it takes a community to protect our paradise.
Everything we're doing is pushing the needle just a little bit.
The potential long-term health impacts of algae and red tide making homeowners, business owners, scientists nervous. Our Alex Hagan in Stewart with a look at the research.
This was 13 years ago. This one's 2013.
Nobody has documented more
2016
than Mary Radabaugh in Martin County.
2018, I've started a book.
4 scrapbooks, 4 algae crises.
Anything that is fluorescent could be dangerous. At this time, it's worrisome. This is Central Marine.
The problem is when you're the manager at a marina and you document that much.
It was disgusting.
Chances are you're exposed to quite a bit of toxins. And so are your employees.
Any level at this point in my mind is not good. So I think if we show signs, it's dangerous.
We know the short-term health effects from the toxin microcystin in blue-green algae, skin, eye irritation, flu-like symptoms. But much of the focus after another round of discharges in cyanobacteria is the long-term effects.
Clearly have an effect on the health of lots of people.
Larry Brand is a professor of marine biology and ecology at the University of Miami. He has been studying this as well, a particular toxin found in cyanobacteria.
Discovered this compound BMAA that apparently can lead to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS.
BMAA is tricky and expensive to test. It's also a slow-acting toxin. He has discovered concentrations of BMAA in fish and other marine life. Either way, Brand is concerned humans may be exposed to it.
Or is it because they simply are breathing the air from the lake?
This study is actually filling a lot of gaps.
Adam Schaefer at FAU Harbor Branch in Fort Pierce has started testing people on both coasts to see if microcystin and other toxins are indeed airborne.
So we really need to be able to, again, accurately measure exposure and then relate that to the long-term health effects.
So there's a push for answers in 2018. But the concern for Mary is once the answers finally come in, it may be too late.
It is concerning that we are 13 years later and we're still not much further than we were then.
And state health leaders told me they are going to wait until more research comes in before commenting on those potential long-term health impacts. But in the meantime, they're urging everyone to avoid swimming or even being near blue-green algae. In Stewart, Alex Hagan, WPTV, News Channel 5.
When it comes to algae, the conversation typically centers around Lake Okeechobee, and many of you want to know how we got to this point. For 50 years, chemicals found in fertilizer have been flowing into Lake Okeechobee through runoff from cattle ranches, orange groves, and septic tanks, to name a few. Those chemicals mostly stay trapped in the lake, but several times a year, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers releases water from the lake into local rivers that lead to the Atlantic and the Gulf. And those releases are needed to protect the aging dike. Mike Trim picks up this story from Lake Okeechobee.
When you see these discharges from Lake Okeechobee and the algae that follows, there is another side to the story.
Every night, people go to bed here in our community concerned about the integrity of the dike because we do know that there are some structural issues.
Tammy Jackson Moore lives in Belglade, one of several communities that depend on the Herbert Hoover Dike to stop Lake Okeechobee from flooding. South Bay is another, and that's where Linda Johnson Ursley lives.
I've always been concerned, especially during hurricane season, because of the pressure that it would put on the levees.
Right now, the dike is under repair, and it's going to take about another 4 years to finish. Every time water levels rise, the Army Corps of Engineers inspects the dike and decides if discharges are needed.
We share those concerns, and in fact, we have a program in place. That's why we aggressively manage water in Lake Okeechobee to keep it from rising too high, too fast.
And now a big decision that could change the course. A reservoir south of the lake that could lower discharges by more than 60%. The Army Corps wasn't ready to comment on the reservoir yet, but many in the Glades are.
We deserve an opportunity to thrive just as any other community.
Jackson Moore and Johnson Ursley hope the reservoir project uses mostly local labor and is built on land already owned by the state.
We understand the blue-green algae. We don't like seeing that in the water bodies just as much as the people that live on the water see it. We want to be a part of the solution.
Many here know this will be a long process, and they hope the ultimate solution isn't just a reservoir to the south, but also something east, west, and north of Lake Okeechobee as well. In Belglade, Mike Trim, WPTV News Channel 5.
It was a sign, red tide hitting our coast.
Still ahead in our Protecting Paradise special.
Where do all the dead fish go? The massive cleanup efforts and how counties dispose of the dead marine life.
Welcome back. We're continuing to get you answers about our environmental crisis. And many of you wanted to know how red tide made it from the Gulf Coast to our coast. Here's how it likely happened. It is all part of the loop current, very similar to the Gulf Stream. And this is a current that meanders in the Gulf of Mexico. A red tide, of course, very prominent across the west coast during the year. And that loop current likely picked it up, took it across the Florida Keys, and then worked it up across southeast Florida. In addition to that, we had strong easterly winds that continued for several months, pushing that red tide toward the coastline, and that's why we're dealing with it right now. Kelly and Michael.
All right, Steve, thank you. When red tide hit our coast, tens of thousands of dead fish washed ashore.
News Channel 5's Michelle Casada shows you where all of it goes after the cleanup.
They knew red tide could arrive at their shores.
Seeing the dead marine life and so forth along the shoreline is an unfortunate situation.
But never expected such high concentrations of it in Vero Beach.
It's pretty much widespread.
And where do you haul dead, smelly fish decomposing on the beach sand? the landfill.
I think it's probably the safest, most economical, and fastest way to deal with this issue.
And other counties are doing the same. Palm Beach County's Solid Waste Authority reports only 2 trucks came into the landfill with dead fish, weighing a total of about 2,000 pounds.
We were fortunate in this last event that the fish kill didn't seem to be certainly as dramatic as what they've seen on the West Coast.
But in Indian River County, that number will be much higher.
We're looking at probably potentially 20 to 30,000 pounds, if not more.
This is what red tide did to 18 miles of beach in Indian River County. Dead fish, eel, and other marine life washed ashore. The cleanup efforts are massive, but the county says the governor's emergency order will provide 100% reimbursement. The trucks coordinate their arrival at the landfill at Vero Beach. Crews on site dig up an area to bury the dead fish immediately.
It's not an ideal smell. Neither is garbage, but at the end of the day, we try to be as proactive as possible to get that buried as quickly as possible.
Burke hopes to keep business as usual at the landfill, even with the extra work.
We hope that obviously this trend doesn't continue for a long period of time.
In Vero Beach, Michelle Casada, WPTV News Channel 5.
Celebrity environmental activist Erin Brockovich took notice of our algae crisis. Those who've been photographing the devastation tell Megan McRoberts getting Brockovich's attention is a big step forward in their fight for solutions.
Well, the former mayor of Sewell's Point and her husband are among those who have been documenting the conditions out here in the water for years, but they've been doing so from the air. Now they do see the conditions out here improving, but there is still something concerning that they see. For decades, flying planes has been a hobby for Ed Lippisch. But more recently, taking flight serves a much bigger purpose. He and his wife Jackie Thurlow Lippisch compiling pictures of what they see in the water from the sky.
It was blue and turquoise and what you dream of.
The view this month took their breath away.
It just reminds you of how beautiful it is here when it's beautiful.
A view Ed also took me up to see. And it's a big improvement from our last flight together in June. That was when we found streaks of blue-green algae throughout the St. Lucie River.
It was like covered.
And miles of water you wouldn't want to touch through canals and in the big lake. Now that's slowly changing.
Right after the Army Corps of Engineers stopped dumping from Lake Okeechobee. Isn't that ironic? Within a week after them stopping, things look a lot better.
But notice what you still don't see.
The most important part of the system is completely gone, the seagrasses.
And without pictures, Lippisch knows it's hard to show the real impacts that keep up the pressure.
I've never seen a situation like this ever.
Erin Brockovich even alarmed by the conditions seen here.
What's happening down here is simply wrong.
Lippisch is glad to have a new voice in the fight.
I think it's incredible, and it's because it's atrocious what's happening here. She only comes to places like that, and it brings attention to the issue.
Attention Lippisch plans to keep bringing to the issue and to anyone else who wants to get behind a fix. Megan McRoberts, WPTV News Channel 5.
You know, the smell coming from thick mats of blue-green algae can be overwhelming. A Treasure Coast man says he knows how to clean it up. News Channel 5's Jay Cashmere shows us his effort.
This is the sound of toxic algae cleanup, and one man knows it all too well.
As soon as I saw it, I said, I know how to get rid of this.
Captain Wilson McQueen took the algae crisis of 2016 into his own hands, literally.
It kind of overwhelmed me because I had so many ideas on it and I built so many different prototypes.
25 to be exact. So when another crisis struck this past summer, he was far ahead of the game. This is the latest version from his company, ToxicAlgaeRemoval.com.
This one is designed to slice the first 1/16 of an inch off and only take off from the surface.
And listen to what it can remove in 8 hours.
5 truckloads. That's 60 cubic yards. It's a lot.
McQueen's vacuum system is gaining so much ground here on the Treasure Coast, it's now being looked at in Tallahassee. The Department of Environmental Protection could actually select this as one of the official prototypes should another crisis occur. But he's not alone. This algae remediation robot project from Marine Cleanup Initiative Incorporated plowed its way through the problem as well. Each machine with the same mission: to remove toxic algae quickly, cleanly, and effectively.
We are kind of open to the worst part of it.
Mary Ranabaugh saw her fair share of devices slicing and skimming their way into the crisis. Central Marine in Stewart was ground zero for toxic algae. Perhaps she knows best what direction we need to be headed in.
Whatever solution we come up with has to start at the lake.
While the debate over where toxic algae is coming from grows louder, rest assured the engines will be firing up to find it.
I did it because I saw that there was a need.
And for McQueen, he's already headed in the right direction.
I would like to see these in Lake Okeechobee before they open the locks. When the algae starts to grow, we should be able to contain it right there.
Jay Cashmere, WPTV News Channel 5.
How do you help a critically ill patient, though, if you don't know all of their vital signs? I look at that major problem when we return. Statewide political races next month may be decided in part by responses to the water crisis. At issue, budget cuts, 25% or more over the last 8 years for environmental agencies. Critics say those cuts have harmed the ability to monitor the pollution, both agricultural and urban, that is making our ecosystem sick. You and I see a postcard October day in the waters off Shepherd Park in Stewart.
It's ugly. It's ugly.
But this trio from the Florida Oceanographic Society knows full well what is brewing below the waterline.
This past summer, over 30 million pounds of sediment, specifically from Lake Okeechobee.
Discharges from the big lake and surrounding farmland rich with fertilizer runoff. Phosphorus and nitrogen in that runoff poured through the St. Lucie locks this summer and into the St. Lucie estuary. Dr. Gary Goforth is an environmental engineer.
And that sediment covers up active, healthy oyster beds. It covers up and smothers seagrasses. The seagrass is an essential foundation for a healthy estuary. It serves as a refuge for nursery for small fish, for baby turtles.
That toxic stew of nutrient-rich runoff fed the blue-green algae that choked the Treasure Coast. Pam Hopkins offered a warning.
The blue-green algae, in many ways, awful as it is really just a symptom of a very, very sick system.
Terminal patient.
Water monitors dot the estuary, checking for salinity, nitrogen, and phosphates, among other things. But these advocates say state budget cuts over the last 8 years have diminished water monitoring efforts deeper into the watershed, near the agricultural lands at the source, they say, of so much runoff.
When you have the data, you're able to sort out fact from fiction. We're failing on the enforcement side of it. And that's the third leg of the tripod, is to have an effective enforcement program to hold landowners accountable.
And without more extensive water monitoring and the public will to make pollution rules stick, a prediction.
It becomes a much less attractive place to live, and I think increasingly it will become an unhealthy place to live.
The environmental crisis, a key issue this election season. We have the scorecard explaining to you how the candidates stack up on WPTV.com/paradise. We'll be back in a moment. Our paradise is at risk.
So WPTV is making a long-term commitment.
We're raising awareness on the issues impacting your quality of life.
And we invite you to come along with us over this next year as we investigate problems and work towards resolutions to protect paradise.
Good night.